California is shutting down its nuclear reactors just as it's trying to lower emissions on its statewide power grid. And that's fairly controversial. And so we're going to talk to Mark Specht from the Union of Concerned Scientists about that issue. And so welcome to the interview, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you've written an article entitled Countdown to Shutdown, California's Clean Energy Future After Diablo Canyon Closes. So that's I think, if I remember correctly, will be the last California nuclear reactor. So why is that significant?
Yeah, so really it's significant because, like you said, this is California's last in-state nuclear power plant, and it's shutting down in 2024 and 2025. And the significance here, the difference here is that California has been planning for this power plant to shut down. And it's actually, the state has made a commitment to replace the power plant with clean resources so that there isn't an increase in greenhouse gas emissions when the plant shuts down. So that's really what's different here with the Diablo Canyon reactor, as opposed to past nuclear power plant closures.
Now, I understand this is controversial in part because while the state has legislated that whatever its generation, it has to be replaced with clean electricity, and no one's doing anything.
Yes, that's exactly right. And this is really one of the issues that's highlighted in the brief that you mentioned, the Countdown to Shutdown report. Essentially, UCS, the Union of Concerned Scientists, we were concerned that load-serving entities in California, the utilities and the community choice aggregators, they weren't doing enough to procure new resources that would replace Diablo Canyon and prevent an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And what our analysis found was essentially that not enough was being done, that the current planning for decarbonizing the grid didn't involve enough new clean resources before Diablo shuts down to offset the energy that was being produced by Diablo and actually ensure that greenhouse gas emissions would not increase due to its retirement. And so that was really one of the biggest findings from that analysis. And one of the most concerning things was just that California had made this commitment, but we weren't planning to actually make the investments in clean resources that we needed to make in order to ensure that Diablo Canyon's closure would not lead to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions.
And of course, all of that is thrown into very stark relief because of the problems in 2020, during the summer of 2020, during a heat wave when basically you had rolling blackouts, and of course now you've also got the problem of wildfires. So it seems like a very interesting time to be grappling with this particular problem. Are there any solutions to it?
Yeah, so I think there are actually two things going on here. Because Diablo Canyon provides many different benefits to the grid, and the two that we're talking about here, at least so far, is the emissions-free energy, the greenhouse gas-free energy that it provides to the grid. And on the other side, you also have the reliability contributions to the grid that helps make sure that the lights stay on when the grid is facing its toughest hours. And so your question about basically about how we're going to deal with this in light of these reliability questions on California's grid is a really good question. And it's something that after those August blackouts, California's regulators and utilities have been planning for much more thoughtfully and much more thoroughly. And we're actually starting to see some progress where California is likely going to be adding a lot more clean energy to the grid in the form of both renewables, but also a ton of energy storage, I would anticipate. And so as far as how we keep the grid reliable during this transition and how we can replace Diablo Canyon with clean resources, I think that a combination of renewables and energy storage especially are going to play a huge role in making sure that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also at the same time keep the grid reliable.
is there, like, looking at it from the outside, Mark, it looks, I have to tell you, a little bit chaotic. And it seems like there's a fairly good chance that 2024 will come along and the state hasn't done enough to bring on, solar or wind or whatever will be to replace Diablo Canyon. So is there a likelihood that the Utility Commission will say, okay, look, we're going to extend the life of this plant while we're getting additional, renewable energy capacity up and running, we're getting enough battery storage installed, or is they're just, that's a hard date and what happens after, it closes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've asked this question myself, and my understanding is that the power plant, Diablo Canyon, will have to close down on those dates. That's a hard date. And the reason for that is because its licenses to operate through the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, Commission, those expire on those dates in 2024 and 2025, and no one's renewed those licenses. And so there really isn't a way to extend the life of that power plant because its licenses expire at that point, and I don't think they would be able to renew. So I don't think there's a possibility for extension there, but I actually am a little more hopeful. Maybe it's because I have an inside view, maybe not that chaotic outside view, but I am starting to see some pretty good signs that California is taking this more seriously and going to be making really large investments in renewables and energy storage. Just actually last week, there was some proposals that came out of the California Public Utilities Commission that contemplate adding over 10 gigawatts of new renewable, new clean capacity, essentially. And so, I don't know, I'm pretty hopeful that California regulators and utilities and community choice aggregators are actually taking this challenge pretty seriously now, and will hopefully be able to get all these resources online before 2024 rolls around and the first reactor goes offline.
So how much electricity actually are we talking about, either in gigawatt hours or in gigawatt hours, I guess, and megawatts of generating capacity?
Yeah, I don't have the exact gigawatt hour numbers, but I know that Diablo Canyon, the power plant by itself, I believe it provides roughly 6% of California's electricity. I think it's 8% of California's in-state electricity generation, because California actually imports a significant amount of out-of-state electricity. So it's not a huge amount, but it's also a huge chunk. It's also a pretty decent chunk of California's overall electricity consumption. So replacing the power plant, it's not an insurmountable task. It's just requires a fair amount of advanced planning. And with those retirement dates coming up in 2024 and 2025, and the amount of time that it takes to get new resources onto the grid, we are starting to run out of time. And now is really the time to take action to ensure that those resources are online before it shuts down.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights, and good luck on this, because it sounds like you really are running out of time. I mean, I don't work in the industry. I'm not an expert by any stretch, but 3 years to bring a significant amount of generation capacity online, develop it, hook it up to the grid, and get it going is a very tight timeline.
Agreed. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.